Oh, man. The fish look kind of sick, dude.
Yeah, they're super sick. Hey, I love them. Have you seen the little blue ones?
No, well, I mean, they seem unwell. This one's swimming really slowly and kind of with a limp? If fish can limp?
No, fish can totally limp. What's the pH at?
7.2, almost exactly in the middle.
Yeah, that's in the safe range. How about the oxygen?
87%.
A little low, but nothing extreme. Nitrogen?
Ammonia low, nitrate a bit high.
Long term, that might be a worry when it comes to growth, but right now we're cruisy. And the disco ball?
Rotating, about 40 revs per minute if I had to guess.
What's that in BPM?
40?
Bit slow for a dance party, but who am I to judge? How about the hedge maze?
No interest. They're all going straight past it and over to the cricket match.
Stupid fish.
Yeah, I mean, who's watching cricket when there's football right there?
Soccer. Football's on the other side.
Don't start. Hey, Walt.
Yeah?
I think your fish tank is a bit too complicated.
What makes you say that?
Well, all of these monitors and the buildings are great, but I don't see any, food.
What? They don't even like the ice cream truck?
I'm just trying to think of the logic behind ice cream underwater.
I mean, my brain goes the other way, which is like, this is terrible.
Water under ice cream?
No. You know, are you familiar with the fact that in America, the water in the toilet bowl is a lot closer to your butt than it is in Australia?
I'm going to stop you right there. We're not going down this route. You know what? We'll change it. The post-skit verse thing. What I'll talk about is I used to have a fish years and years ago.
This sounds much more PG.
My fish was called Pepsi.
Love it.
One day, I tried to feed it Pepsi.
Oh.
Believe it or not, he survived.
No!
He was a Siamese fighting fish, and by God, that fish was a strong fish.
He was a tough cookie.
Yeah, I had it in Queensland. It died sitting on a shelf on the window because it fucking cooked.
Oh, no.
R.I.P.
That's
Pepsi.
so sad. Anyway, welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP, brought to you by POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast, where whales have teeny tiny hip bones. I'm your host, Walt.
Yeah, I do salsa dance.
They actually
Shakira.
They have teeny tiny hip bones.
Did they really?
It's one of the reasons that they know that they're descended from mammals that lived on Earth is like, if you look at a fucking blue whale skeleton, it's like massive spine, and right at the end, a tiny hip bone with nothing attached to it, because they don't have legs anymore, but they still have a tiny hip bone.
Oh, weird.
So
Evolution
cool.
is bizarre.
Yep.
Hello, Commander players. I'm the one greasing your elbows, James. That was decided by our playgroup a couple of nights ago.
I just remembered that was a democratic process.
Yep.
Look, before we get to the transmission, we stream every week at twitch.tv/getcommanded every Monday night, 7 o'clock Melbourne time. We play live Commander gameplay. It's been lots of fun.
Yeah, we've been playing every single week for the past 2-3 months.
Yeah,
the YouTube,
long time.
And we upload it to YouTube after every week. Mm-hmm. However, because my partner's just finally had top surgery, and there's been a lot going on.
Which is so exciting,
very exciting. The YouTube channel has fallen pretty far behind.
Totally fair.
But while Theo is recovering from top surgery, I'll be uploading a couple of videos onto the YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So stay tuned.
Yeah, definitely check it out. We're at Get Commanded on YouTube, aren't we?
Correct.
Yeah, cool.
Or it could be Get Commanded Podcast. I always forget which one.
Patreon, we're Get Commanded Podcast. Yes. I think we're Get Commanded on every other platform.
Yeah,
I think.
At Get Commanded. Go to YouTube. And Twitch.tv, though, /Get Commanded. That is the best place to hang out with us. Chat has been popping off in the last couple of weeks.
It's been awesome.
Yeah.
If you just have general thoughts that you would like me and James to share our opinions on, we're obviously playing a game and we're focused on the game that we're playing, but we have time. You know, it's a Commander game. There are 3 other people's turns.
It's a social format. We're happy to chit chat.
Exactly. So definitely drop it in. So twitch.tv/getcommanded. You don't want to miss out.
No.
We do have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Goldfishing can prevent the most common deck building mistakes, including disparateness, consistency, and playstyle incongruence.
Bloody hell, their vocabulary is just
They've gone a bit
level.
off, haven't they?
Yeah, I feel like they were in the space station, spaceship, or on their planet. I actually don't know where they've been from.
I don't know where they
are. But I imagine they were there and they had like done a recent trip to Earth and stolen a thesaurus. And they were like, we need just have a crack at new words.
We need more words. Gotta stop using these same boring ones. Goldfishing.
Yeah, we're doing playtesting, otherwise known as goldfishing.
Yes, that's true. It is a slang term. Yeah, the fish.
Hence the
yeah,
fish.
they
Makes
know what
sense.
they're doing. Yes. So yeah, when we say goldfishing, we're talking about playtesting. I think it's basically because like you can think of playtesting your deck like you're in an aquarium. You know what I mean? Like if the sea is the
scary world of Commander.
Yeah, of playing at a game store and with random people who you don't know, or
where
even
there are
with your
sharks
friends.
and stingrays and barracudas. And
that's true. Then you could be a little goldfish and you could be in a little tank and you could practice swimming around in there first before you try the big wide ocean. So yeah, goldfishing is just playtesting your deck on its own. You're not playing against anybody. You're just playing itself just to see what it does on its own from turns 1 to 10.
It's a super fun topic. We've not really talked about it yet. And I've actually, if you take a look on our screen board, you can see that this command actually has a CC on the email chain here. And it's one of our patrons. This is a patron request. So thank you, Wizard Down Under, via our Patreon for suggesting this episode.
Yeah.
We hope that we cover this topic in the ways that you were hoping for. And
definitely.
Thanks for requesting. And if you wanted to suggest episodes that you want to hear Walt and I talk at length about, I feel like we're going to talk at length on this one.
Absolutely, we will.
Go on to Patreon. There, you can sign up to the Space Commander tier and you can request your very own episode on this podcast.
Yeah, we're happy to do it, definitely. And thank you, Wizard Down Under. Look, I think maybe the one way this has come up recently is we keep on shouting out this Command Zone episode that they did on Goldfishing. We keep on shouting
out this whole Command Zone channel. Who are these guys?
Who are these guys?
We're giving them this platform.
Look, they're these up-and-comers. We feel like you should give them a chance.
We're really helping out the little guys on this podcast.
Now that we've grown as big as we have, we think it might be time to pay it forward. Shout out some small creators.
So it's this small group, Josh Lee Kwai. You probably haven't heard of him. Jimmy Wong, Rachel Weeks.
They make this show night games.
Yeah, they play
game nights,
exclusively in the evenings.
Anyway.
Yeah, they did an episode recently, which we have kind of pointed to in a couple of conversations recently.
Yeah.
Where they talked about goldfishing at length. And they talked very specifically about the nuts and bolts of actually gold, like the mechanics that you're looking for and the way you should do it. And step 1, do this. Step 2, it was almost like an IKEA set of instructions for goldfishing.
And look, like it's a great video as well. Like they have, the sort of first half of the video is them talking about goldfishing, why it's important and why they do it. And the second half is literally just Rachel and Josh actually goldfishing their decks and being like, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I might swap out. So yeah, if you just are after the nuts and bolts of how to playtest a deck, cannot recommend that video highly enough. However, the Space Commanders did not ask us for that. They said that there are deck building mistakes we can avoid if we goldfish.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to be specifically looking at. And those 3 that they listed out we'll definitely go into. Look, I think I'm probably going to be talking at length in this episode just because I goldfish fucking far too much.
You do it at work a lot, don't you?
I don't know what
another tab.
you're talking about.
Dude, I've been texting you. Like, I've been goldfishing this deck. I'm like, aren't you at work?
I don't know what you're talking about.
And again, for the second time on this podcast, Walt's employers, if you're listening to this.
No! Look,
it's all a farce.
It's
all a bit. We're doing
I
it for the
do
bit.
my job as well, obviously. I'm not like someone's like, oh, well, I've got someone on the phone who's after you. And I'm like, shut up.
I need to figure out
if this works.
What happens on turn 5 in my deck. I need to know.
Anyway, we're talking about why it's important to goldfish. I think it's important to say right out the gate that you can playtest your deck either in a digital client like Moxfield or Architect. I personally use Moxfield when I playtest. You can absolutely playtest in paper as well. I will say that the big downside to paper as opposed to digital playtesting is that you can playtest a deck before you've bought any of the cards on Moxfield. And this is a real benefit because, as we'll go into a bit later, you can be testing a deck where you're like, oh my god, this Anointed Procession is so good in this deck. I can't wait to buy one. It's going to be so good. And then it's only when you're playtesting it digitally that you go like, it's actually not that good in this deck. And now, if you've done it digitally, you've just saved yourself the like 40, 50 bucks to go buy an Anointed Procession because you know you don't actually need it anymore.
Yeah, for sure. I think digital clients are always a great way to do it. Mainly, there's a couple of reasons for it, which we'll go into later. But like in paper, if you were playtesting on like with actual cards, you have to physically shuffle the deck.
Yeah, it's true.
Online, you can click shuffle deck.
It's so much of your time.
You can just speed through it. You can also make edits very, very quickly on the fly as you're goldfishing.
Yep.
You can do things like, quickly flick out a bunch of cards from your deck from the top of library to see like what the next couple of draws are going to be like. And then, it makes so much sense. I goldfish probably not as much as Walt. I goldfish CEDH decks a lot.
Which is a really good thing to do, by the way. Yeah.
I goldfish CEDH decks specifically because I want to know exactly what turn they're trying to win on. If I'm playing my Niv Mizzet deck, I know it's like more turn 6, turn 7 that I'm trying to win. Yeah. Whereas when I'm playing my like Mad Farm Jessica Timna list, I'm like gunning one for turn 3, 4, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And knowing when to tutor and what to tutor for.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of things in a CDH deck. Like even knowing what fetch lands to crack and for what dual land.
Yeah.
That's a skill of its own in CDH.
Just for like, things like, okay, well, if I play a fetch lands and don't need you to use any mana, I can crack it on the end step and get a tapped shock land. So that way I save, because I'm an Adnor's deck, I save myself that 2 life, which could be really crucial.
That could be 3 or 4 cards in an Adnor's deck. Yeah, there's lots of things you'll find. Look, I think that's a really good thing to do. I don't think we're going to talk a lot about CDH. I mean, all of this I think would still apply to CDH, but we're going to be talking a lot from a deck building perspective.
And I think we're going to be looking at casual very specifically in this, because there's a couple, especially when we're talking about, playgroup incongruency, like we want to know. We'll get there. Mostly casual, but I think a lot of the lessons we're talking about you could apply to CDH too. Yeah.
Look, I think we're going to be talking a lot about Moxfield in particular. It's just because it's the website that me and James use. I've actually heard that Architect has a arguably even better playtest function.
I have used it just recently. I've been looking at a couple of new decks, which instead of a Moxfield list, I've randomly found their Architect lists.
Yeah, right.
And I've just, instead of porting it over to Moxfield to playtest it, I've just clicked the playtest button on Architect.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very fancy animations.
It's got animations.
Very clean looking, very like space age, where Moxfield is very like,
it's functional.
It's very function over fashion.
It doesn't look particularly good, but
still very
it works.
Good. Yeah.
And look, I think if you specifically want to know more about using Architect, I would point again to that Command Zone video, because when Rachel does her playtesting in the second half of the video, she uses exclusively the Architect playtester. Yeah. So if you want to use that, absolutely, you can go check that out. I will be talking about Moxfield because it's just what we use, but you can use either of them, are totally fine. All right, playtesting. We should actually get into it. So before we even get to those mistakes, deck building mistakes that the Space Commanders talked about, I feel like we should just talk about just the really simple and crucial elements of playtesting, just in general.
The principles of playtesting.
Yeah, the really important ones. And I think the thing I want to make sure we're all on the same page with is speed.
Mm-hmm.
You should playtest at speed. We're looking for quantity of playtested games here, not quality of playtested games. So again, we're only really focusing on the first maybe 1 to 8 turns, and even then you can focus on only turns 1 through 6 if that's your main focus for your deck, which is totally valid.
Yep.
But we want to see those turns 20, 30 different times to see what the trends are of time.
Yeah, because we'll have a different opening hand every time we play it, and that will cause a different sequence of plays, that will cause a different outcome. We might have a tutor in our hand, which will tutor for a different thing in one scenario than the other scenario. But we're looking for, quantity over quality. We're not looking for like, I really want to see how it works against this specific archetype of deck. We're looking for, I just want to see this deck play out as it would in a vacuum as many times as I can.
Definitely. And so there's a few things that we can be doing here to save ourselves on time.
Mm-hmm.
Don't crack fetch lands is one way you can quickly do it. Just say to yourself, I found the land I needed, and just tap it.
Yeah.
Tap it as though is the land that you're going to go find.
I'm a big fan of cracking and shuffling, mainly because we're on a digital client. Like,
oh, sure. It's pretty fast.
It's pretty quick.
Well. Yeah, that's true. I think definitely if you're playing in paper, don't crack your fetch land.
Yeah,
that's going to take you way too long.
Charge through it if you're playing in paper.
Yeah. Don't track your life total. It's very rare that it will matter at all in terms of you. Once you start playing against others, obviously it matters. But if you're cracking a fetch land and going and finding a shock land, don't take your life total down by 3. It doesn't matter.
Unless, in the very specific scennario, you're playtesting the Rowan, the black-red Rowan, then you should probably track your life total. But
that's true. Or I guess if you were on, like, a Kirik, the
Kirik,
black, your life total doesn't matter there. Obviously, there's exceptions, but the vast majority of the time, your life total in terms of playtesting your deck won't matter. So don't bother tracking it.
I will say that while we're talking about speed, shortcuts on Moxfield, like I showed you if you just go V on Moxfield
to view your library. That's been a big one for me recently. Yeah,
opens up your entire library and it will automatically put your cursor in the search bar.
Yeah,
this is why I'm like actually pretty quick on cracking fetches, because I'll just like play a fetch, put it to graveyard, press V, then go overgrown tomb, drag overgrown tomb.
Yeah, you can type into the. It actually uses Scryfall syntax.
Yes,
you know. So if you're someone who is a nerd like me who can use it, I found it really helpful for when I am playtesting my Gandalf deck and I have Oswald Fiddlebender.
Oh, you can go Artifact CMC.
I can go mana value 4 and go type Artifact, and then it will literally just show me what my 4 or 5 targets could be there. That one's that's going to save you a lot of time when you're searching your library. There's a couple of other quick ones to reel through on Moxfield. You can hit the word D to draw a card. N for your next turn, so that'll automatically untap and draw you a card for the turn. X makes a token copy of something that is relevant so much more than you would expect.
That's one you showed me that I've now used a lot. Like, especially I'm playtesting a Slimefoot and Squee deck at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And I just like go hover your cursor over the sapling and just go X, 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 and it just...
If you're making lots of tokens, you don't want to be going to that token bar and hitting go sapling. No. Just go X, 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 and then you got as many as you need. And of course, because we're focused on speed, you can hit the letter R and restart.
Yes.
And it will just shuffle up and draw you a new 7 and untap everything, put everything back in your library, obviously. And that's great for just, again, the speed of playtesting these decks.
We're just going for as many as we possibly can.
Yes. That said, I think the next thing that I think is important is to actually not be hasty with changing your deck. So play through it quickly, like when you're playtesting turns 1 through 6, but the reason we want that quantity over quality is we want to see cards in a bunch of different scenarios before we cut them. So in that Anointed Procession example, yes, it might be the case that, on this particular board state, when you then cast your Scoot Swarm, oh my god, this Anointed Procession is so good now. I make twice as many Scoot Swarms. But you might need to see that Anointed Procession 4 other games and see that in all 4 of those other games, it's bad.
Yeah.
And then you know that you need to cut the card from your deck. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've had a couple of games specifically with like my Tornos deck is a big one that I've play tested where I've been like, this is really good with a couple of other combo pieces.
Yeah.
But how good is it on its own? And I will play test the deck a million friggin' times just so I can see that specific card, when I'm playing it, is good in other scenarios other than with just good combo pieces. Yeah. And like, if I find that I've playtested, let's say I playtested it 30 times where that card has come up, and it's been good 20 times, I'm like, that's pretty good. I actually really like that. Whereas if I find that it's only been good 5 of those 30 times, I'm like, oh, that's not good.
You can be too hasty in either direction here, right? Like, you can see a card be good and be like, okay, that card's good in my deck, and then subsequently find out it's not good. Or you can go the other way and like have a card do really poorly 1 or 2 times and go like, man, this card's clearly sucks in this deck. And then it's only before you've played this another 10 times that you go, actually, every other time I get this card out, it's amazing.
I guess the big thing here is that the sample size really matters. For playtesting and goldfishing to give you relevant data to go off, the sample size has to be big enough.
Yeah.
Like, I heard this like really great analysis with flipping a coin, right? If you flip a coin once, you have a 50-50% chance of it landing on heads or tails.
Yeah.
If you flip it twice, same deal, right? Statistically, you should have a heads and a tails. However, you might flip those coins and get heads 2 times in a row.
Yeah.
The more you flip that coin, the more you will represent the actual statistics of the outcome of that scenario.
It's true.
So if you flip it 1,000 times, you're much more likely to have a true representation of 50-50 or closer to the 50-50 ratio.
Yeah, it might be 502 and 498.
Exactly right. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for relevant data here. If we just playtest once and go, yep, it works, off to the game store.
Yeah.
You're probably going to draw a different 7 cards in your opening hand, and it will play out very differently.
And this is the appeal of the goldfishing, right? We can learn all these things about our decks before we shuffle them up and play against a bunch of other people.
And before we embarrass ourselves at the game store.
And also, Commander games are long. Like, if you're playtesting and you might be able to play 15, 20 games in a 20-minute period at home, like play those first 6 turns. Yeah, goldfishing, I mean. And learn that thing about your deck. But, if you don't learn that thing about that card that's really terrible in your deck, and you get stuck with it in a game where it does nothing and you do nothing, that's going to suck.
And then you're going to go home and take it out. But then maybe that was just the one-off scenario where it didn't do what it did.
Exactly.
And then you're too hasty again. So yeah.
It's like, and this is the real appeal of goldfishing, is we can learn all these things before we have to experience them.
We can do it en masse. We can do it en masse.
It's really good.
I think something else that you should probably think about when you're goldfishing is you are specifically goldfishing in a vacuum.
Yes.
You are playing your deck in a vacuum, so don't worry about pretending that your opponents have removal.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people try and do this, and I even do it sometimes to see if, what if my commander gets stopped or, all this kind of stuff. We'll talk about that later, but, really, when you're playtesting out, just pretend your opponents can't see you. Just pretend your opponents aren't there, because guess what? They freaking aren't.
Yeah.
Just playtest your deck and do it as many times as you can, and don't stop yourself.
Yeah.
Just, see what the deck wants to do.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. The deck is, taking you on a specific path. If that path is uninterrupted, what happens?
Yeah, and I think this is the thing, is it's you can kind of look at your deck and be like, if my deck doesn't even work in a vacuum with no removal, it absolutely will not work if I start playing against opponents, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure your deck at least works in a vacuum, and then you can worry about removal. You can start to think about do I have a relevant protection piece like a Swiftfoot Boots for my commander is something that could be happening in your head. But yeah, ultimately you're focused on okay, does my deck at least do the thing it's trying to do? Because that will be the ultimate decider as to whether we want to play the deck anyway. Sometimes you get a lot of removal cast in a game, sometimes you don't. You want your deck to at least work if it's uninterrupted. Yeah,
I am building a Go Wide and Craterhoof Behemoth the table deck.
Yeah.
If I play my deck, does it A, go wide, and B, Craterhoof Behemoth to win the game?
Yeah.
Does it do that when it's not uninterrupted? Yes, no, good, bad? Yeah, that's how you analyze it.
Definitely. I think, I know we said don't be hasty with changes, but I do also want to say that the sideboard is your friend.
Yeah.
Or in the case of the deck building website, you might be using
the considering
board. I think there's a maybe board in one of them. There's a bunch of different ones.
I'm a big fan of the considering pile. I like the considering. You're a sideboard person.
I like sideboard because you can see it. The considering on Moxfield gets hidden by default.
I like that though, because then once it's in the pile, I don't think about it until I have to go, oh, what cards am I considering?
Yeah.
When I find a card that I want to cut, I'm like, okay, what do I replace it with? What's in my
then you open
pile?
It up. Okay. Yeah. I like having it all sort of on one place. That
makes sense.
Do whatever makes the most sense to you. There's no right or wrong answers here. But yeah, it's your friend. If there's something fun or powerful or interesting that you just need to cut to get your deck down to that 100 cards, or because you think it's not quite working, just put it in that sideboard. Set it aside. You can come back to it, and you'll ultimately learn as you playtest the deck whether that card is good anyway, because you'll learn what the deck wants to do.
Yeah.
So, in the Anointed Procession example, you might learn as you're playtesting the deck, even though you cut Anointed Procession, actually, I have a bunch of cards that make treasures. And the more of these,
cracked with Anointed Procession.
It would be great if I had the ability to make more treasures than I was otherwise going to have. So that's going to be a reason that you might want to chuck it back in. And it's good to just have that place to put a card that you're just thinking about but not cutting completely just yet.
I reckon I usually have around 10, 15, maybe 20 cards at a push in my considering pile.
I'm about the same.
Yeah, for a while. And something else I'll do as well, here's another hot tip. Open up the playtesting screen on one tab and the sideboard. If you've got 2 displays, which let's be real, we're all nerds, we probably all do. Put your playtest area on one screen and your considering pile sideboard on another screen. And as you're playtesting, if you're looking at a card to cut, have a look at that considering pile and go, what would I love to be in this slot instead of that card.
Yeah, I think it's really good to have it open and to be actively going, like, when that card that you're not sure about comes up, okay, what would I substitute this for in the sideboard? And so even though we said don't be hasty with changes, as you're playtesting the deck, you might just note in your head, every time that I would instead be casting, this Panharmonicon, I'd rather if it was an Anointed Procession every single time. And then you got another card you're not sure about. Every time that card comes up, you're like, I wish that was Anointed Procession. It's probably time to put Anointed Procession in the deck.
Yes.
But you've learnt that now after playing it and seeing the scenarios play out. For sure. I also, by the way, when I'm building a deck for the first time and I'm at 115 cards, I just say to myself, okay, every single card I cut now goes into the sideboard. And it makes it a lot less painful to cut those last 15 cards because it's like, they're not gone forever. I'm just thinking about it.
That is an experience that every Commander player has come to of like, I don't want to see you leave this deck list. I worked so hard on Scryfall to find you.
You're so weird and only good in this deck. Please be good in this deck. Yeah, we've all been there, but at least you know that they're there and you can revisit them later if you decide that they're good. I have one last bit of tip here. I got this one from Rachel Weeks over at Command Zone a while back, but I think maybe before she even joined Command Zone. She was like, if you're playtesting and you draw an opening hand with a Soul Ring, always mulligan it.
Yeah, okay, I get it. Because, like, Soul Ring hand makes any deck good.
Yeah,
like
every time.
Honestly, I had a game... only like a week ago where I was playing my Zaxara deck, right? And I had a Forest and a Soul Ring in my opening hand as my only 2 mana producers.
Yep.
But I had a Kadama's Reach.
Yeah.
And I was immediately like, well, I can keep this.
Yeah.
As long as no one has a mental misstep for my Soul Ring, I'll be fine. And I played it out and I won that game because I fixed mana, ramped, and oh my god, it was just stupid.
Yeah.
It was just stupid.
Soul Ring is an unbelievably powerful card, and it will just warp whatever game that you play it in. So if you have it in your deck, obviously, I'm not saying mulligan your Soul Ring if you're playing in a game. No, keep that hand, obviously. But if you are playtesting, you want to playtest the hands that will be realistically happening more frequently.
Yes.
And Soul Ring just gives you unrealistic expectations about what your deck could do. Like, I have my the 6 mana, what's he called? The Jund Vayvictus. My Vayvictus as Marty
the big dragon
deck.
boy.
Yeah, he's a 6 mana Jund dragon. When he attacks, you sack a permanent. And everyone sacks a permanent. You reveal the top card. You put it onto the battlefield if it's a permanent. If I can get him out, 2-3 turns early.
Oh my god,
I'm
game
off
is
the
over.
Races. And so when I have a Soul Ring in that hand, like the representation I get of that deck of flipping my 1/1 goblin into a Coveted Jewel, into a Muxus off the top. Like, that's not representative of what the deck's normally going to do. And Soul Ring's kind of warped my ideas around the deck because of it.
I guess, look, I mean, playtesting it out once with a Soul Ring hand to see what it does do, that's fine. Go for your life. But, like, if you are even playing in that upper echelon of Commander and you're running a Mana Crypt or a Mana Vault or something like that, you should think about, like, okay, if I'm only running these as my fast mana pieces, how often am I going to see them? I'll playtest one hand with them, but make sure you're playtesting hands without them in it so you know what it does when you don't have that fast mana.
Well, and those are going to be the more challenging games anyway, right?
Yes.
And you really want to understand how your deck gets out of slightly harder situations.
Yeah.
And so, it's better to playtest those.
I've had it before where I've, like, playtested a hand that's playable but with no ramp in it. Like, I feel like...
just curves out well.
Yeah.
Cast a 2-drop and a 3-drop or whatever.
I mean, here's, like, a general tip when you're, mulliganing. I think we've got a whole episode coming on mulliganing, surely.
Probably.
But, like, when you see a hand that curves out really well, you can keep it even if it has no ramp. And sometimes I'll playtest a hand with no ramp in it at all just to see if the deck does the same thing but 1 turn later.
Yep.
Or whether it does it 5 turns later. Like, how important is ramping in my deck?
Well,
that kind of thing.
The thing you'll learn about that as well is how important ramp is in that deck in general.
Yes.
And that's going to allow you to adjust your ramp count. Because, if you find, oh, wow, my deck doesn't do anything unless it ramps on turn 2, you got to chuck more turn 2 ramp in there. But likewise, there are a lot of decks that, as we've talked about before in especially the Mana Curve episode, there are decks that if they just curve out and play a creature on turn 2, 3, 4...
it's winning.
It's totally fine. It's functional. It might be better than ramping in certain decks. So you've got to playtest to learn these things.
Right, we've been talking for half an hour. We haven't addressed what the Space Commander said at all.
Sorry, Space Commander.
We should probably get on to the mistakes that they said that we all make when we're playtesting.
Building mistakes that we can avoid by playtesting. Yeah. So, the first mistake they mentioned was disparateness.
Disparateness?
Yeah, like coming from the word disparate here, I think. And I'm not saying desperate in a Kiwi accent. I'm so disparate. I'm so desperate that this dick works.
For some fish and chips after this game of Commander.
After I finish dick building, I want to get some fish and chips. Anyway, I don't know.
Fuck,
sorry,
we just
Kiwis.
lost 5 people.
We actually love you, and I hope you love us. I hope it's not like Flight of the Conchords where you hate all Australians like those guys do. Anyway, disparateness. Disparate describes something that is made up of opposing forces. So if we're talking about a deck, we're basically describing a deck that lacks focus, right? It's disparate. It's trying to do too many things. It's trying to be pulled into this token direction and in this +1 counter direction, and it's trying to cast artifacts. There's all these things happening, and consequently the deck is going nowhere. So we're trying to avoid...
streamlined enough.
No, it's not focused at what it's trying to do. Yeah. So how do we spot this in our playtesting process? Well, I think you got to keep an eye out for cards that just don't do much. So, you know, like we talk a lot about enhancers on this podcast, right? I mean, Anointed Procession is a good example. This is a card that if you're already making tokens, lets you make more of them. Yeah. Cards that enhance the things you're already doing. You know, Veyran, for instance.
Yeah, another great example. This one, it's if you were to cast or copy a spell would trigger a permanent on your board, it triggers twice. It's like Panharmonic on Anointed Procession, but for spellslingery stuff.
Yeah. It means that your Archmage Emeritus draws you 2 cards every time you cast a copy
Your
of spell.
Young Pyromancer makes you 2 tokens.
Your Prowess triggers happen twice, which is relevant because Veyran has Prowess.
She actually doesn't.
It's not Prowess.
It's Magecraft Prowess. It's a stupid card, and I will continue using it because I spent $50 friggin' on this card.
Oh, I still feel bad about that. We were placing a singles order, and I was like, I don't know if I told you if I just bought it.
No, you just bought it. Because I was building my Savine deck at the time, and I had Veyran in the list, and the Veyran regular, like stock standard, is like a $20 card.
It's expensive.
It's expensive, but I was like, it's good enough in my deck that I want it in.
I think what I did is I messaged you and I was like, man, Veyran's kind of expensive. Are you sure you want it? And you were like, yeah, no, it's really good. Yeah. And then I didn't like ask you follow-up questions like what I should have asked, which was, okay, I've got the extended art foil here. It's twice as much as the other one. Are you sure you want it now?
Twice and a bit, mate. That made my singles order so much more expensive. But
you can't cut it from the deck because it's an investment in his future at this point.
But when I was playtesting with it, I found that it was really, really good in my deck. It synergized with enough stuff that I was like, yeah, this stays in. But there was definitely some things at the time that I was looking at that I'm like, oh, maybe that doesn't synergize as well. And this is what we're looking for. And this is like one of the most common deck building mistakes that we've talked about at length. Yeah. And it's so obvious when you're playtesting your deck to see what stuff synergizes with. I've talked about that thing before where I like, while I'm playtesting, I might do a version of playtesting where I get an enhancer and I go, right, I'm going to draw from the top of my library until I find something that this works really well with.
Something this enhances.
Enhances. I'll obviously skip lands, don't count those as counts, but like, how many cards does it take until I find something that it works with? For example, my Veyran deck, guarantee it's like 3 cards deep. It's got something that goes bananas with.
Yeah. I mean, look, you can do this in Moxfield as well, right? The highlighter feature. I did this on stream the other day and people were like, what?
Yeah, chat freaked out at that. I was really happy with that.
It's a great feature. There's a little highlighter in the top right on Moxfield and you can type in with Scryfall syntax, or it's got sort of an advanced search kind of thing as well, just for a particular thing and see if that appears on cards and how many cards get highlighted by it. So yeah, in the case of Veyran, you could go, okay, I'm looking for the word Magecraft. How many cards do I have that say Magecraft on them?
Or
how
I'm
many
looking
cards...
for whenever I cast an instant or sorcery.
So that line of text that would appear on Young Pyromancer. And then if you highlight those 2 things and go, wow, it's only 10 cards, Veyran's not going to be up to scratch in your deck. Unless maybe one of them's the commander. Yeah. That would be relevant. But yes, this is something you can identify in deck building is going like, oh wow, when I have this Veyran on the field, there are just so few things in my deck that will ever trigger it. Yeah. Every time I cast it, it just sits there doing nothing.
Yeah. In the same vein, when we're using that highlight feature, something else that I really like to do around tutors is use that highlight feature. Because like if you've got, I don't know, let's use Trinket Mage for an example. That's
the 3 mana creature.
ETBs gets an artifact CMC or mana value, sorry. I keep making that mistake.
1 or less.
Yeah. And then there's Tribute Mage, and then there's
Another one.
Something mage.
Something.
They're all blue. They're
Yeah, and they all
ETB.
fetch artifacts
There's
with
one
particular
that's
mana values.
6 mana value.
Yeah, and
Anyway.
there's one that's like 2, I think.
But these are a really good example, right? We've talked about how tutors, the more conditional you make a tutor, the funner it is to play in your deck.
Yeah, we love conditional tutors.
Yeah, conditional tutors, big thumbs up. But like, okay, now you're playing a conditional tutor like Trinket Mage. When it ETBs, how many things can you get with it?
Yeah.
Like, have a look. When you're playtesting it, you'll shuffle through your library, and sometimes I've done this, but I'm so guilty of this. I've put in tutors for like 1 or 2 cards because it's like part of my deck's like super duper strategy.
Yeah.
And then I've had the card like Trinket Mage in hand, but I've also had the card that I would tutor for in hand.
Yeah.
And I play Trinket Mage and go, oh, there is nothing else for me to get.
Yeah,
There's actually nothing.
You need a certain number of hits. I mean, the good thing about Trinket Mage is that no matter what, it gets Soul Ring.
Yes.
So, like, that's the good flaw of this card. If you have a Soul Ring and then, 2 or 3, if you've got a Sensei's Divining Top and a Soul Ring, maybe that's enough. You know, if you get one of those 2 things, whatever. But yeah, you should have, I think, at least 3 to 4 hits. And ideally, you want hits that can get you in different directions with your deck, right? Like
pivot you in like scenarios.
Yeah, so you don't typically want every Trinket Mage hit to be a mana rock. Because then at that point, it's like, well, it just always gets me Soul Ring or always gets me something like that. That's fine, but mostly, if you're a deck that really cares about Sensei's Divining Top and you have a Trinket Mage and a Soul Ring and a Mana Crypt, suddenly Trinket Mage is like, oh, wow, I can go like any of these 5 directions now.
At that point, you should put an Urza's Saga in there just to like make sure you're getting it all the time.
Same kind of thing. And this is what we mean by disparateness, is you want to make sure that when you are including those tutors and those kinds of conditions in your deck, of things that only work with certain other things, make sure that those things that you need are present in the deck.
Yeah.
Make sure Trinket Mage fetches artifacts. Make sure that your enhancers actually enhance parts of your deck. And in a similar vein, I mean, we talked about this before, it basically is like a get commanded adage at this point. The equipment deck problem.
And immediately I'm on board. I know exactly what you're talking about.
We always bring this example up, but we've both built, I think, equipment decks before.
Yeah.
And it's the problem of an equipment deck is you need to have equipment themselves, but you also need creatures to equip with the equipment. So the example that often comes up is my Sir Gwyn Hero of Ashvale deck. This is the one that makes equipment equip for free 2 knights, specifically when Sir Gwyn is out. And then when you attack with equipped creatures, you draw cards. But you need to have knights and you need to have equipment. And it's a delicate balance getting the numbers of these 2 things right, because if you draw only equipments, your deck doesn't do very much.
Yeah.
If you draw only knights, your deck doesn't do very much. It's quite delicate, and you got to make sure your numbers are in line with what your strategy is, which is really split pretty 50-50 between these 2 things.
It's a tricky thing, but we've actually solved this problem recently on the podcast in an episode called Viva Negativa, which is where we talked about cutting those unwanted strategies from your deck to streamline the process to make sure that your balance of equipment versus knights is right. That whole episode was like really, really good in solving the problems, but I hope that playtesting is the thing that we're trying to get across here, that you will notice this as you goldfish. When you cast that Trinket Mage, you will notice, have you played 30 games with your Sir Gwyn of Ashvale deck? How many knights did you draw versus how many equipment did you draw? Have you had games where you've just had equipment scattering your board state and no knights to equip them to?
There was a period of time before I knew about the Moxfield highlighter and I knew that I could sort of sort for particular things in Moxfield, where my Sir Gwyn Hero of Ashvale deck, I was aware of how many knights were in there because I could just scroll through the creatures and count them. I just hadn't really done a count of equipment because I was looking at the artifact number, and I was like, oh, most of those are probably equipment. At one point, I looked at it, and I was like, how many actual equipment are there? I feel like I keep on missing on equipment in this deck, and I found out how to do the highlighter, or actually, I sorted by subtype, which would have equipment pop up. Yep. And there was like 15 equipment in the deck. And I was like, there is no way this is enough for a deck that wants all my creatures to be equipped at all times.
You're basically sat on like 18-18 at the moment, right?
I think it's about 20-20. Yeah. About like 21 knights and 20 swords or something like that, which is
nuts.
Roughly what you need, because then you need the rest of the deck. Like you need ramp and card draw and everything.
Thankfully, your commander does the card draw bit.
It does, but you got to get to 6 mana first. It's a whole thing. But yes, basically find these parts of the deck that are making it disparate, get them out of there via Negativa. We've been talking for a while.
We have, yeah.
I reckon it might be time for a thrifty interlude.
Yeah, this is kind of like Walt when he's at work. He'll take a break from work and playtest. But instead, we're going to take a break from playtesting and hear about a thrifty card.
Well, I am an actor, so we're kind of taking a break from playtesting and working in my case.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we're completely inversing your usual work day.
As always, James goes off script so well. We've got lots left to cover.
To be fair, I had that one in the bank already at the start. I knew exactly what I was going to say.
Back. He had a little smile on his face. He was like, I'm ready. We've got lots left to talk about, including consistency and playstyle incongruence, which we'll definitely need to define.
Yeah.
Before that, we're going to do a little something about a thrifty card. As is tradition, I will be performing, and this week, James joins me in performing a dialogue. James, sometimes goldfishing feels like you're lost in a maze, don't you think? Do you want to read us the card we're featuring this week?
Yeah, it's Lost in the Maze. For X blue and a blue. You're so stupid.
I scripted that one. I'm not going to take credit.
I can see this. Lost in the Maze. For blue, and X, you get an enchantment with Flash that says when it enters the battlefield, tap X target creatures, put a stun counter on each of those creatures you don't control. And reminder, if a permanent with a stun counter would untap, it removes the stun counter instead. Tapped creatures you control have hexproof. Hello? Hello? Is there anybody out there?
Yeah!
Oh, hi. Thank God. Please, help me. Sorry, I can't remember which way is out.
Oh, silly little man.
Yeah, very silly of me. Sorry about that. So which way should I go?
No sandwiches. No charcuterie.
What? No, I don't have any food on me. I'm lost. I'm actually really hungry now that you mention it. I'm thirsty. Have you got any water?
No shark white, yeah?
Look, I've been here for maybe an hour. I just need a hand. I'm really hungry and thirsty, and I keep running into dead ends.
Dead end?
Yeah, like when the path runs out and there's nowhere to go. Look, could you grab your boss or something? I don't fully understand.
Oh, I know what you want now.
Yes, to get out, like I keep saying.
Yes, you want end of life. What? To get out of it. Death.
What? No. I didn't say that.
I send in Mr. Scorpion Head. He will help with your life problem. Farewell. Thank you for visiting the maze of quick death by Scorpion.
I should have known there was a limit to my Demir Land all-day pass.
Get budgeted!
Oh, man. I usually have like a fun little segue out of those things. I have no idea what to say. Look, I do imagine if there was a Demir Land, it would be very close to that. And now I'm trying
very
to
close to
think
Disneyland, you mean? Or?
Yeah, very close to Disneyland. Exactly right. Mickey Mouse coming out with a scorpion head and just killing you.
End of life. If you enjoy that, we released them. I write them.
Don't drag me into this again.
I'm not doing it. I write them. They come out every Thursday in the Greensboro Commander Community Discord server, which is also where we hang out with our play group. So you can check out that Thrifty Thursdays channel, but the whole server's linked in the show notes, and that's our favorite place to hang out and chat with all of you.
Yeah, it's a good place.
We like it a lot.
Not much else to say about it.
No.
But, we do have a lot more left to say about playtesting.
We certainly do. And we should get straight on to those mistakes that the Space Commanders were talking about. The second one. So we talked about disparateness. They wanted to talk about consistency.
Yeah.
This is another thing we've talked about at length in a recent episode. We took specifically consistency entirely in an episode. But I think we should look at it briefly here through the lens of playtesting.
And how to notice that we've made mistakes in the deck building process when we're thinking about consistency.
Yes.
By noticing it in our playtesting.
Exactly. So the main place that we can look for consistency in our playtesting is basically what we're doing, which is what does my deck's ideal first 7 to 8 turns look like?
Yeah.
Really think about, like, you know, in a perfect world, what turn does my commander want to be deployed?
Yeah.
Does anything need to be on the field before my commander comes out? Do I need to have a spell in my hand to follow the commander with? Like, really just get down to the really fine detail here.
I always think about it as like what's the narrative of my deck? I think I actually said this in that consistency episode where it's like, if I was to tell the story of like once upon a time, there was a commander deck. On turn 1, it did this. On turn 2, it did this.
Yep.
And then on turn 7 and 8, it did this and won the day and saved the princess and happily ever after. What's my, oh my God, happily ever after is actually a card. Lol. But like, what's the story of my deck? And then like, I completely agree with you. Getting into the real nuts and bolts of it is like, okay, yes, what is the turn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ideal scenario?
Yeah.
Like if I could build the story, how would I build it?
Exactly. And look, the goal is not to have exactly the same game with our commander every time. We're just looking to make sure that the deck always arrives at its sort of engine, you know? Like a lot of the time, this is literally just as simple as, when's my commander come out? What do they need on the field, and what happens after my commander comes out? And it can be very simple, you know, like a Mirim deck, for instance, this is the deck where when a non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you make a token copy of it, except it isn't legendary. Very simple Mirim strategy, right? You want to ramp so you can get Mirim out early, so your first 2 to 3 turns are ramp.
Yep.
Then you want to cast Mirim, and then you absolutely must have a good dragon in your hand for that next turn to come out after Mirim so that you get the value of it immediately, right?
Yeah.
Very simple. Like, it seems like it's going to be really complicated, but that just means your deck now is built around, okay, I need low ramp that costs 2 or 3 mana. Then I'm going to cast Mirim, and then I need high impact dragons. That's it. That's your deck now. Yeah.
So now when you're playtesting, play through that scenario and go, okay, is my deck doing this? So like when I've playtested it 30 times, how many times did I ramp on turns 2 and 3?
Yeah.
How many times did I have a high impact dragon in my hand on turn 5 and turn 6?
And what turn was Mirim coming out would be a big one there. You know, like the ramp needs to get you to Mirim on turn 4 or turn 3, ideally.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's just, for sake of another example, look at another deck, just as a quick example. Let's look at my Firelaf deck, for example. My Firelaf deck is a, big mana landfall deck. So I want to make sure that I'm ramping out to Firelaf so it can ETB, make a bunch of plants.
And he's a 6 mana commander, by the way, 4 red green.
So I want to make sure that I'm ramping turn 2 and 3, and so I can get it out at least on turn 5.
Yep.
At the most turn 5, I would say. At earliest turn 4 would be fantastic.
Yep.
But then what I need to make sure of is, can I get landfall triggers happening after the commander comes out, so I can put the +1 counters on it. So when I'm playtesting, I need to make sure that I have access to maybe play another fetch land from the graveyard or cast another big ramp spell at like the 6-drop slot. Like, for example, or like a 4-mana one, like a migration path, something like that.
Card draw becomes really important in that deck, I've noticed as well, because just hitting your land drops after you've deployed Firelath can be enough, right?
Yes.
Even if you just get 1 landfall trigger per turn, that can get you there, but you certainly don't want to cast Firelath and then, as you say, not have landfall triggers happen after that. You need them to keep on happening.
Especially when I'm playing like Azusa and Exploration and I'm playing multiple land drops a turn. I want to draw 4 cards a turn so I can play 2-3 lands a turn.
100%. So you're basically, when you're playtesting, you're just saying, how often does my dream scenario play out when I actually playtest, and how can I adjust my numbers to increase the likelihood that everything goes the way that I'm intending that it should. And look, things should work out about 90% of the time when you playtest. Again, we're not looking for identical games, but if your scenario is, Firelath, I want to cast Firelath early. I want Firelath to come in and make this many plants. I want to have, a landfall trigger the turn after that. That's a pretty clear set of circumstances that you can define. And if your deck wasn't doing that, was doing that 50% of the time, you want to make sure you can increase the likelihood of that happening.
100%. I want that to be happening at least 27 out of the 30 times I goldfish my deck.
Yeah, which is like, 85% roughly.
Yeah.
Probably wrong. Anyway.
Quick math, not get commanded strong suit.
I did an arts degree. Anyway.
I did a business degree and nearly failed accounting. So neither of us are good at this.
We're not numbers guys. It's a good thing we never have to use numbers in Commander, hey?
No, never, ever. At all.
Some common issues that you can run into when you're looking for this consistency, just to really like hammer home what you're looking for and how you can be defining these problems.
Yeah.
Okay, what's some things we're going to run into as we're playtesting. Commander timing. We've touched on this already.
Yes. That's a big one.
It's a huge one.
Yeah, our whole deck is built around our commander.
Yeah. So once you've defined when your commander needs to come out, are they coming out the time that you need them, 80% of the time?
Yeah.
Are they coming out too late? You probably need more ramp. I will say, like, there is a real category of commander. It's so common, it's unbelievable. 4-mana commanders that want to come out early. They want to be the first thing that comes out on your board. And you are in luck if that is the case, because you can just ramp on turn 2. And as long as you hit your 3rd land drop, you will cast your commander on turn 3 every single time.
Play no 3-mana ramp spells.
Nope.
Get that Commander Sphere out of your deck as quickly as possible and replace it with a Signet, a Talisman, a Farseek.
Even a diamond can be worth it if you just need 2-mana ramp. A charcoal diamond, a fire diamond.
Like, if you've never heard of these are shit ramp spells that are 2 mana, tap for a color, and enter tapped. But like, genuinely, if your commander is a 4-mana commander that wants to come out as early as possible, turn 2 is like your best chance to ramp because it will come out on turn 3.
Definitely. And then I think the sort of inverse of this commander timing thing is what I would call like deck timing, which is, does your deck need particular things out early that aren't your commander? This is the 99.
Oh, so like, for example, if we're an aristocrats deck, we want to flood the board with tokens.
Yes, and the earlier the better, right? Like, we might not need an aristocrat deck a card immediately, like a blood artist, but we need to have
But we want to see like our Bitter Blossom, our Ophiomancer, our this, that, and the other that make tokens every turn.
Yeah.
Coming out first, so then we can play our Sacrifice Outlets, and then we can play our Blood Artists.
Yeah.
Probably actually in the other order. Blood Artists first, then Sac Outlets, maybe.
It depends on the deck.
Depends on what you call.
And like, I think that there are decks where the commander can even come out after all of this stuff has happened. So for instance, I see a lot of people playing Teysa Karlov.
Yeah, the double death triggers.
Yes, and they deploy Teysa really early. And I'm like, I don't think that's how you should be playing Teysa.
Have you got a death trigger on board yet?
Yeah, don't bother. She's just going to get removed. We know how much of a problem she is. You should be deploying, token generation, an aristocrat effect, ideally a sack outlet. If you can get all 3 of those things, great. Then Teysa Karlov.
Because then it's like, okay, Teysa resolves, someone casts a removal spell targeting Teysa, and you're like, in response, now I have a board full of tokens, gonna sack the board, Blood Artist, and, another, like, Bastion of Remembrance. These all trigger double because she's still here. Yeah, I'll sacrifice my whole board, drain you for 50, and then Teysa can die. Yeah. Oh, you're dead already? Your spell fizzles? Sorry about that, champ.
I have seen games where Teysa Karlov only gets cast once, and it's to win the game.
It's like a win con. It's like same like a Kamal deck, like a deck that's running Kamal Heart of Krosa in the command zone. That's game winning. I mean, the mana value of that card should indicate what it's kind of trying to do.
An 8-drop commander is not common,
Yeah, but you shouldn't be casting him in the early game.
No.
You want to cast that after you've got a board full of dudes or a bunch of lands that you can animate.
Definitely. I think another one I want to highlight here, that's not so much the deck timing thing. I know I spoke about this. I think even in the consistency episode, land drops. As you're playtesting, are you hitting every land drop? And if not, you may need more low mana card draw or more lands. I'm not going to soapbox again. I've done it already. But like, seriously, it's so important that you hit your land drops. And especially like, yes, getting out. I know we talked about ramping into your turn 3 4-mana commander. That's great. But also, you want 5 mana on the turn after that.
Yeah, so you want to hit your land drop. Because if you ramp and don't hit a land drop, congrats, Chief. You cast a spell to hit your land drop.
Yeah, it's actually...
You haven't ramped yourself.
It's worse than hitting a land drop because you spent mana to be net exactly where you would otherwise be.
God, what was that tweet you retweeted on our feed the other day?
It was just after the Trump convictions had come through. And it was someone who said, you should, in a commander deck, you should play no fewer than 1 land for every one of Trump's guilty convictions.
34.
34 counts of felony. Don't play less than 34 lands in your deck.
God. I saw that retweeted to our Twitter and I was like, I'm not even mad.
Oh, so good. So good.
Speaking of land drops, something else that in, 3 and up color decks we should be looking at is how well we fix as well.
Oh, colors. Like what lands we have, mana producing artifacts. Yeah.
Yeah, so like, especially like, if you've just built the deck and put in a really rudimentary mana base in there and it's like very basic heavy and there's not enough like mana fixing.
Yep.
That's a very easily noticeable thing when you're playtesting. As you're playtesting out, you go, oh, I only have blue sources right now, and I have a spell that has 3 red pips in it.
Yeah.
I've got Chiskoria in my hand. Need the red.
Yeah. It's a huge thing. I think especially like there'll be cards in your decks that are very mana pip intensive. That's just what happens in decks in general. But especially your commanders. If your commanders are really important, they need to be cast early, and you're in a 3-color deck.
Yeah.
Gosh, your fixing needs to be so good. I think there's a few things you can tweak here. Obviously, the lands is one thing you can do.
Yep.
You can just add more
better
multicolor,
mana base.
a better mana base. You can just add more tapped lands. I know people are always so low on like the life gain tap lands and stuff. And look, I think you should play those underneath a bunch of other lands.
Yes.
But like the scry lands are fine.
Yeah. The new Surveil lands are amazing, but very expensive.
They are, but like there's a lot of very playable, mostly tapped 2-color lands. Even the cycling lands, I think, are pretty good. The ones that you can pay 2 generic to cycle. But yeah, if you can play a tapped land early and make sure that you have your colors for the next 3-4 turns of the game, I think it's totally fine.
There's a couple of like really amazing rainbow lands, like 5-color lands that I think people are not playing enough of in their 3-color decks.
Yeah, probably.
Like, I think people are very quick to include rainbow lands in 5-color decks, and they're right to.
Yeah.
But when I'm playtesting a 3-color deck, I am very frequently finding that I'm like, oh man, I can't cast 2 spells this turn because both spells are 2 blue pips.
Definitely.
And I can't do both of them, so I need to choose one of them. I would much rather have a rainbow land like a Mana Confluence. I know that's a bit of an expensive one, but I'd rather have a rainbow land in my deck like a Reflecting Pool or a Forbidden Orchard or something like that.
Or even, I don't know if I'm going to cop some flack for this. I play Path of Ancestry in decks that do not have any creatures with the same creature type as my commander. Like my Vivictus Asmadi deck is Dragon in the command zone. It's a goblin deck.
Yeah.
I never ever scry, but it's a tapped 3-color land.
You're not catching any flack from me because I do this as well.
Yeah.
There's a really strong reason why. Okay. Your triomes that everyone's running in the decks at the moment, they're freaking out about them. Yes, they're fetchable. That's amazing. But take that out of the equation. Your Path of Ancestry is a triome. It could be a 4-color land. It could be a 5-color land.
Yes.
It's tapped.
It could be better than a triome.
And when you untap for the first time with it, it's then just a regular multicolored land that you can use.
It's a command tower.
And when you cast your commander, you scry 1.
Yeah, even if it just...
That is that is the flaw of this card. That is good enough.
Even if it just said tap add a mana of any color whenever you cast your commander with this mana scry 1, if you are in 3 or more colors, I think it's totally worth it. Like, especially, gosh, if you can play this turn 1 and just know that you have every one of your colors for the rest of this game on this one land, like it kind of can feel like a second copy of Command Tower. It's not. I know it's not second Command Tower.
But it's pretty friggin' close.
It can feel pretty close. And I think that you can play more tapped lands than you probably think you can. I see people build decks and they're like, all the shocks, all of the fetches, all of this stuff. And it's like, that's great, but you can build a totally functional mana base for a lot less money than this.
And I think that, back onto playtesting.
Yeah.
Chuck these cards in your deck and then playtest it out and see how much more frequently you can cast in your 4-color deck 2 spells that both require 2 blue pips.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's something I in my 3-color decks, I don't know why, but all my 3-color decks are very pip intensive. Like my Zaxara deck has like lots of blue pips or lots of like black-green blue pips.
Well, Villainous Wealth.
It's like a win con, right? I want to make sure I'm getting those colors, and my Zaxara mana base could use a bit of an upgrade, really. And I'm now looking at like those. I actually don't think I have a Path of Ancestry in that deck. Yeah. Definitely should. It's a Hydra deck. I'm going to scry a bunch.
Yeah, totally.
I really want to be looking at this because as I've been playtesting it recently, I've noticed, I have to choose between this spell and this spell. I can't do both of them.
You can't do both in the same turn. Look, I think when you play 3 or more colors, the way Magic is designed is that it should be hard. Like, there will be times where you can't cast every spell in your hand, and that's kind of, people are like, oh, this is such a shit aspect of Magic. And it's like, no, this is actually power balancing. Yeah. If you could always play a 5-color deck, then in every format, everyone would play a 5-color deck, and that would not be a good game.
Yeah, but we get commanded and we're trying to break the game.
Yeah, that's true. But, yes, I think, more fixing can help, and tap lands are totally fine. On Moxfield, you can actually scroll down and you can see towards the bottom, there's a little like color pie.
Yeah.
It tells you the
percentage of pips versus the percentage of mana production.
Yeah, in your lands and your other artifacts and stuff. It's a really good way to then tweak your basic count at least. Yeah. To match those kind of those kind of things. But look, there are other ways to make it so that you can get your colors better. Any kind of fixing ramp will do this.
Yep.
So 3 visits obviously can get typed. 3 visits nature's law can get typed forests, so you can get your triumphs, you can get your shocklands, that kind of thing.
Farseek gets typed not forests.
Yep, yes, specifically. But you can get forests if they're also not forests.
Yeah, you can get a triumph.
Yes, you can.
Yeah,
anyway, you can.
You get what we mean.
Yes, but you can also have just multicolor rocks. Like Arcane Signet is a staple of our format for a reason, but there are other rocks that do this. I think Felwar Stone is still underplayed in Commander. A good chunk of the time, that is an untapped, it's another copy of your Talisman of Curiosity. Yep. Sometimes it's better. Sometimes it's an untapped Talisman of Curiosity that also produces black, Like, it's very, very good there. Yep. But yeah, playtesting is going to let you see, how often are these cards stranded in your hand? And certainly, how often do you have to wait to deploy your commander because you don't have the mana to cast it yet?
Yeah.
That's a big one.
That's why I love commanders that are multicolored, because they have an activated ability. Color. Big fan of that.
Kenrith Enjoyer over here, yeah. I think another one that we'll run into really frequently in terms of consistency is just cards in hand. And the usual way this will play out is too few cards in hand, right?
Yes.
You just find you empty your hand all the time and you're just top decking, hoping for more stuff to happen.
I've never playtested a deck and drawn shitloads of cards during playtesting and gone, wow, this is a problem.
I have.
You
actually.
have?
I have. Specifically, my Azor the Lawbringer deck.
Oh, you haven't had enough to pay off that card.
Yeah.
Because that's a card draw matters
It's
deck.
a card draw matters deck. So Azor, when he attacks, does Sphinx's Revelation, right? So you pay blue, blue, white, and X. Gain X life, draw X cards.
Yep.
And so the thing I find happening with that deck, or especially happened a lot in the past, was that I had these 6 drops, and I was like, is that better than drawing me 4 more cards here? And so actually the thing I would say, I think this can happen. You can have too many cards in hand if you're a deck that draws cards really well. I think it usually reflects that you need to lower your mana curve, because there are too many cards getting stranded in your hand. And if you had cheaper spells, you could empty your hand, then draw a bunch of cards.
Yeah.
Then empty your hand, then draw a bunch of cards.
Because you could replace some of those big card draw pieces with more impactful 3, 4 drops.
Yeah.
4 down to 2 drops.
Yeah.
That maybe trigger when you draw a card.
Yeah.
Psychosis Crawler is 5 mana,
Yes.
but that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Maybe even like an Ominous Seas.
Yes, I have an Ominous Seas in that deck.
Yeah,
and
so that's a great example of take out one of those big mana draw spells, put in an Ominous Seas. Now you've got something to do when you draw those massive cards, and you can empty your hand after you've drawn those cards.
Yeah, exactly right. But I think, as you say, much more common problem. You find yourself playing a deck and going oh wow, I just never have enough cards.
Yeah.
When I first built my Gandalf the White deck, obviously I'm in white.
Yeah.
I just realized yes, once Gandalf is out, all of these crappy artifacts that ETB and draw a card draw me too. But also I need to draw enough lands to reach Gandalf in the first place. I play something theoretically 25 pieces of card draw in that deck because they're mostly artifacts that just ETB and draw a card.
I've really enjoyed seeing your Gandalf deck come to fruition, because I was there at the very beginning of it, the idea, because you kind of started building it at CanCon.
Yeah, we were in that hotel, the smallest hotel room in existence.
Very cozy together on the bed there.
A shower you could probably have your foot, shower/bathroom.
Yes.
Where you could have your foot on both walls and not be doing the splits.
Yeah. you could put your arms out and your elbows would be at least at a 90-degree angle.
You could probably touch both the back of the toilet and the shower head with both hands.
You can't swing a cat, is what we're saying. But yeah, I've really enjoyed seeing how at the very beginning of that deck, we were like, wow, 10, 15 pieces of card draw in this deck is going to be fine because everything draws you double as much. And then we were like, oh, no, wait. We need to do more than that because we need to get Gandalf out.
He's a 5-mana commander.
Yeah.
It's actually tough to get there in the first place. So yeah, more card draw was important, and in that case, more ramp. But yeah, it's the play testing where you realize oh wow, I'm just always emptying my hand, or yeah, I'm not quite getting to this board state I need to get to.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Look, something before we move on to the next category, I've got one thing to add to this list, which is something that I find very frequently overlooked because playtesting is specifically in a vacuum. We're playing without other people.
Sure.
Something people overlook very frequently is their interaction, right?
Yeah.
And I think
their removal, their protection. Yeah.
Removal, protection, or just general interaction with the board in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
If you're playtesting in a vacuum, you don't need interaction because your opponents aren't there.
No.
So it's very, very easy to go, oh, I really want that card in my considering pile. Let me
cut the interaction from the deck to get it in there.
Exactly right.
Big time.
So something very, very big in your brain when you're thinking about consistency and noticing these mistakes like, land counts and mana fixing and all this kind of stuff is how many of those 30 games that I just play tested did I have a removal spell in my hand?
Yeah.
And also like a removal spell, I'm usually a big fan of the turn 5 removal spell rule.
You've spoken about this before, I think. So you like to, on turn 5, make sure you have at least one removal spell?
One removal spell,
that makes
at least. And one that I can cast that is like, not going to blow me out a lot or something like that. And just like every time I play test, I'll at least do 5 games where I'm specifically thinking on turn 5, there is a game-ending threat on the board. So
I need to be able to answer this threat. Yeah.
Someone's commanders come down and it's like a threat to us all. We're all going to die if we don't deal with this.
Yep.
And then turn 5, turn 6, that's usually when that happens in a real game.
Yep.
So I would say that when I'm playtesting 30 games, I'll playtest in a vacuum, not think about interacting with my opponents. Yep. But I'll 5 to 10 of those 30 games, I will go, right, I'm going to pretend that there's something I need to remove. And how well does my deck dig for an answer is a big thing. So like if I'm on, turn 5 and I don't have that answer,
can I go and draw
five cards to find that answer?
Sure.
That kind of thing.
I think the other really important thing here, and this is going to come into mana curve and also your ramp, is do you have, because most of the best interaction in our format is instant speed, right? Do you have the ability to leave up the mana for that interaction on that turn as well?
Yeah.
So when it gets to turn 5, like you don't want to just hold up Sublime Epiphany, right? You want the ability to have maybe Counterspell or maybe Disenchant and also deploy at least one thing on your turn. And that's going to, the main things that are going to affect your ability to leave up that 2 mana is, do I have the ability to play a low mana value spell? That's one scenario. Can I play a low mana value spell that affects my board first?
That builds me up
So I can leave 2 mana open.
Yep.
And or have I ramped enough that I can afford to pay 5 for this spell and have 2 left over to leave open for other things. Both of those are totally valid. You can have a low ramp deck that has low mana value impactful spells. That's totally fine and valid. Or you can go the other way, but you must not end up in this awful middle ground where you go like, either I leave up Disenchant or I develop my board. You do not want to be choosing between those 2 things.
You might end up in scenarios where you're choosing between, do I cast my 7-drop now? Or do I cast a 5-drop and hold up a 2 mana interaction piece?
Which is great.
That is a phenomenal thing. If you're playtesting and you have that choice, that means your deck is perfect.
Yes.
Like, I actually think that in terms of consistency of interaction, that shows that you're in a perfect position because it means your deck is ramping enough to have that decision.
Yep.
And you've got the choice to do that. So, like, for example, if we're taking that playtest scenario in a real game, let's put our board state in a real game on turn 5, 6, and we've got the choice between 7 mana spell that ends the game and gets us to a win, or a development piece and an interaction piece.
Yep.
Let's quickly threat assess. Do I need to interact?
Yep.
No? Fantastic. 7-drop. Do I need to interact? Yes. Okay, not 7-drop. I'll put the 5-drop out and hold up this 2 mana.
Yeah.
It's like, if you find that, if you're playtesting and you see that, you are, let me come over and give you a hug.
Yeah.
You did a good job.
You're doing
done.
really well if that's the case. Definitely. And certainly as you're playtesting repeatedly, if you often have those multiple branching options, those are also the decks that are most fun to play.
Oh, God, yeah. 100%. If you've got a decision tree in your deck, that's where the fun of the game for me lies. I know a lot of people really like linear decks, but
it's totally fine. Look, I think if you're starting out, it's totally fine for your decks to be linear. But as we get more and more skillful as players, I think most of us chase those like, ooh, this or this or this.
I have like 5 different options here.
Yeah, that's super fun. I think we should get to that third mistake that they were talking about and define another word. Yeah.
Another fancy thesaurus word brought to you by the Space Commanders.
Playstyle incongruence is specifically what they said. So your playstyle is obviously the way that you like to play. And incongruence basically describes something that does not mesh, right? It's like a discrepancy between 2 things that are trying to happen at the same time.
Like something that should have a logical connection, but there isn't one.
Yeah, exactly. Or being pulled in 2 directions or something like that.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about playstyle incongruence, I think we're talking about decks that don't suit your playstyle. There's an incongruence between what your playstyle is and how you like to play and this deck that you've built that has its own particular play style. There's an incongruence there.
And the message basically is, you will notice this when you're playtesting.
Yeah.
That's like the whole message that we're trying to get across.
Well, I think most importantly here, we've covered a lot of the really important steps as you're playtesting and refining your deck, making sure it works.
Yeah.
This is, to me, kind of that last check of, is this a deck you will even enjoy piloting?
Yeah, so
right?
once you've got it to a working state, once the deck works, am I having fun?
Yeah.
That's like, am I going to actually go on the Card Singles website, put it all in my cart, hit checkout, spend my real world money that I earn at work playtesting this deck to buy these cards to play it in real life?
I've earned it.
What's that TikTok sound? It's like a reward.
Exactly right. I think it's really important that a deck is your brand of fun. There are decks that are theoretically fun and theoretically very functional and very good that you might not have fun building. I've built so many of them.
Maybe, for example, you've seen like a friend play a certain play style of deck and you're like, wow, they have so much fun playing that. I'll build something like that.
Yeah.
But that's Walt's way of playing, not the James way of playing.
100%. I mean, I've been sort of on a little bit of a task recently, a very slow task of I want to build at least one monocolored deck for each color.
Yeah.
So I've built white in Gandalf. I built Mowu a while ago in green.
You've built Krenko in red.
I guess so. Yeah. I might come back to red at some point, but yeah, I have theoretically done that. But I haven't done blue. I haven't done black.
Mm-hmm.
I was wanting to build a Flyers deck again. I used to have one, and I haven't had one in a long time. And I saw Donal, Herald of Wings. It's just like Donald without a D.
Oh, you sent me this deck.
I did. So basically, for 2 blue, he's like a human wizard or something. When a creature with flying enters, a non-legendary creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, you copy that spell. Sorry,
when you cast it, it's a cast trigger, yeah.
Copy that spell, triggers only once per turn. So basically, you want to have non-legendary flyers, and you get multiples of them.
Yeah, preferably playing them with flash so you can play them on each person's turn.
That's always fun.
Pretty good
yeah, those become especially good. But yeah, I did like a ton of playtesting of this deck. I really refined it. I worked out it was a 4-mana commander that wanted to come out early. Has like every 2-mana rock you could ever want in there.
Mono blue.
Yep. I worked out like the average mana cap I wanted. I worked out what my card draw wanted to look like. I just had solved all of these problems. The path that I wanted through the deck worked. It was heavily optimized. Like the deck was functional. And I kept on playtesting it. And I was like, I just don't know if this is fun. And that's when I sent it to you. And I specifically said to you, like, I don't need notes on the deck. The deck works. Like, I'm confident the deck will be functional.
I do remember this message.
Yeah. Do you think, James, I will enjoy this deck?
So then what I did after receiving that is I play tested it out a couple of times. I played like 10 hands to see what it does. And I thought, Walt, playing this deck, is he going to like his play style? Is he going to enjoy this? And the answer was no.
No.
It was way too linear.
Yeah.
But it's also like a weird... I don't know. It was like this weird kind of like holding up mana decision tree because you had a lot of like blue kind of interaction-y type pieces.
Lots of counter spells.
Lots of counter spells.
I was just kind of
in
like, this is the kind of deck that gets wrecked by a board wipe, and blue has
you need
no
to protect
answers to board wipes except for counter spells. So.
And like, I think that I've often seen you play decks like this and you freak out. You're like, too many decisions, don't like it. I want to play at sorcery speed. Make tokens, overrun.
It just wasn't where I wanted to be. I still got the Moxfield list. If anyone wants to see it, you're welcome. I will send it to you.
Like, it's a fun deck.
It's a good build. It's a good deck. Like, it will work. I have tested it enough times. I know it will work.
The Moxfield name was like Donald Duck or something, right? Because it was Herald of Wings.
Donald Duck, the fly-in, and then you can complete the last word of that sentence. Anyway, I've done this a bunch of times. I've built decks on digital clients and just never built them in paper because I just don't think they are what I wanted to do.
I've done it a few times as well.
Yeah. I built the Slime Against Humanity when that came out. You assisted me on this one.
We spent like a night on Discord just like cranking out Scryfall searches.
We basically settled on Umori being the commander. This is the one that's actually a companion. But basically, it comes onto the battlefield, you choose a card type, and spells of that type cost 1 less to cast.
So we chose sorcery.
And basically made it a sorcery type all deck. There were 50 sorceries in the deck. It was very consistent. It was a weird brew. It was very fun to brew the deck because it was how can I find a sorcery speed removal spell that feels worth it? So I found all these weird, like, 2-for-1s at sorcery speed and stuff. The problem was it was just like basically the same problem with Donald. It's very linear.
Yeah, it's one of those decks that say you can play any number of these in your deck. So you are basically casting the same spell every single time.
Yeah.
And while it's cool to think about because it breaks the rule of Commander of
Yeah.
Singleton, it was a bit boring.
It was just a bit boring to do. I had a similar problem with Rurik Thar. I keep on doing this. I'm realizing that all these decks have the same thing in common, which is like
Types.
types.
Yeah.
And they're like very all in on something, and then there's nothing else to do because of that. Like Rurik Thar, I wanted to set myself the challenge of building a deck with 50 creatures in it, which I did.
Yeah.
But the problem was like the inconsistency was just through the roof because sometimes you draw, because card draw was a big problem.
Yeah, you need to find that Beast Whisperer first.
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
every creature
and
cantrips.
then every creature cantrips.
Yeah.
If you find the Beast Whisperer, holy cow, the deck was amazing.
Churning
Cantrip creatures. No one can ever deal with Rurik Thar because he deals 6 to them. It was a very hard deck to build, but then piloting it, I was just like, wow, if I don't find card draw, I just empty my hand and do nothing.
Yeah, I built Kellen, the red-white Kellen, the one with the
shooters, and then goes into adventure, right?
Yeah, it's got the adventure spell is a sorcery that tutors an aura or an equipment to
basically open the armory.
On a fucking commander.
Yep.
Because why not?
Yep.
And then Kellen it's a really weird. I thought it would be really, really interesting, right? I was going to try and build it as a Sunforger deck because I thought that would be my playstyle. Like Sunforger, like you unequip it and you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your deck, 4 mana or less.
A red or white instant with 4 mana or less. Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of fun, right? Like I'm responding all the time. I'm equipping stuff.
Yep.
And basically, as I was playtesting it out, I was like, okay, this deck wants to be more of a Voltron-y token deck because Kellen has the ability that each creature gets +1/+1 for each equipment and aura on Kellen.
Yeah, so you weirdly want to go wide and tall
Voltron,
on Kellen. Yeah.
It's a bizarre build. And then when I was trying to do this Sunforger thing, I was like, okay, now I'm just playing a Boros good stuff deck. And I tried it, and I really did. I really tried to build it out in like so many ways. And I just was like, this is a Voltron deck.
Yeah.
It's a Kellen deck that maybe you have a couple of token synergies so you can, safeguard your Voltron strategy with a different approach.
Yeah.
But what I was trying to do with it just wasn't it. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll just take Sunforger out of this deck. And I'm like, well, that was the whole point. I was building it. That's the whole point of the deck. I was like, why I built it. I don't want to take the whole reason I took.
Yeah.
I thought about this commander. So yeah, I still have the Moxfield list if anyone wants to check it out. It's called Kellen, a bunch of swords and a big hammer. That was the Moxfield name.
I think just tutors in the command zone just have this problem, right? Where it's like, I can build down this extremely narrow path, but that's also all the deck becomes. Like, it's like, I haven't seen one in the wild, but people complain a lot about Light Pause.
Oh,
the 2 mana white thing. You cast auras, you get an aura with lesser mana value out of your deck.
It's cracked.
You just get like
it's
anything.
It's also 2 mana commander.
Yeah. It's cooked.
Yeah.
And I would just, every time I look at it, I'm like, that would be unbelievably boring. Like, there would be the objectively correct aura to find in your deck every time. And it's probably the one that gives protection from creatures or hexproof or indestructible. And it's like, once it's got indestructible and hexproof, it's like, who's ever dealing with this?
Now it's a Voltron slowly beat you to death arch enemy game.
Hyper boring. I have tried 3 times now to build a spirit typal / tapping deck because it's the one thing that spirits do well as a type.
You were trying to, I remember we were talking about the Hilda.
Hilda was the closest. No, Hilda was. I built it online. Yeah, it was the closest I got. So I built Rhoda and Tim in a while back. That did not work at all. I built Hilda, and then the deck that I was closest to was Charade, which is the one from Wilds of Eldraine. Whenever you
blue-white, I'm assuming.
Blue-white. When it ETBs, you put a stun counter on a creature and tap it. And whenever you tap one or more creatures during your turn, draw a card. Triggers only once per turn. Okay, not during your turn, sorry. Whenever you tap one or more creatures, draw a card. Triggers only once per turn.
So you can do trying to do it once every turn, not every your turn. You're trying to do it on your opponent's turn.
And there's really good ones, like there's one of the like Khan's Dragons enchantments that says at the beginning of combat on each player's turn, tap target creature that player controls.
It's guaranteed, just
draws
a card.
4 cards a turn. It's like Rhystic Study and I guess blue-white.
Wow, Rhystic Study and blue-white? Who would have thunk
it? And for only 8 mana. Anyway, look, the problem I kept running into is tapping stuff is just kind of boring.
Yeah, it's not winning you the game.
No,
it's slowing it down.
And like either the deck would have lots of tapping stuff, in which case I'd do that really well. And like Charade was probably the closest I got to building this deck because as long as I tap stuff, I draw cards, which means I can find more things to do. But the problem is to have enough ways to tap stuff, you can't play many spirits.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, I need more spirits. And then you play more spirits, which takes out more of the tapping stuff. And now your commander doesn't work. And it's like,
yeah.
I think it's just too many. They haven't printed the perfect commander for this archetype
And
yet.
all of these problems are so noticeable when you playtest, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's like obviously you can, like for example, these are decks that we have built in Moxfield and never built in paper because as we were playtesting, we noticed that, for example, my Kellen deck, it was like, okay, I'm now losing the Sunforger thing to go for this Voltron thing.
Yeah.
I noticed that was what the deck wanted to do and was pivoting into, and I was like, no, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I do have a piece of advice to avoid the pain and suffering of the effort of going in and building and spending ages building a deck and then just go, I'm not going to build it in paper.
Sure.
Playtest other people's decks.
I just don't do this.
I do it all the time because I have found that one, I'm very time poor at the moment.
Sure.
I don't have a lot of time
to brew the deck in the first place.
Yeah. And brewing, it will take me at least like a good hour to get a good function of a deck together.
Absolutely.
At least.
Yeah.
I don't have that time to brew. Like if there's a new legend coming out in Modern Horizons 3 that I'm like, oh, I'm so excited to build it. I'll wait, Google deck, and it will come up with other people's Archidecks and Moxfield lists. You can click on it. It's a public thing. Click on it, click the playtest button, playtest it out.
Yeah.
I do this all the time. I think the reason why I did this is because I've got a lot into CEDH. And for CEDH, you really want to find other people's lists because it's a meta and you want to understand how their decks work.
Learn how their decks work so you can beat them better as well.
Yeah, basically. And I think the reason I started playtesting casual decks online built by other people is because I started doing it with CDH decks. And I was like, hey, this actually makes me understand how I would build this differently.
Yeah.
So like, for example, when I went online and looked up Kellen Sunforger decks, I found that, a lot of people built this as like a Boros good stuff.
Yeah.
You know? And just recently I've been looking a lot at the, there's a bunch of friggin' commanders from Modern Horizons 3 that I've been
really
looking
cool
at, to be
ones.
honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went online, had a look at those decks and was like, let's see which one I go, this is fun, but I'd do it slightly differently.
That's what you're looking for.
It's the slightly different, right?
Yes.
You're not like, I want to build this completely different. It's
No.
this is it. But
Yeah.
let me put it in my Moxfield.
and find the cards I would play in it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I think is when you playtest someone else's deck, these are the two scenarios you can end up in. Either you will go, oh, I hate this.
Yeah.
In which case, does not matter how you build that deck, you will hate that. That's what the commander wants to do.
Like Kellen, it's wanting you to stack a bunch of swords on it. I didn't want to do that. I've not built it in paper.
Kellen is not the deck for you. But if you play someone else's version of the deck and go like, interesting, I like this theme, but I'm not so hot on this theme, and I don't have the money for that smothering tithe. Maybe I'll go all in this way. That's a deck you could try building yourself.
And honestly, and at that point, it's actually really easy to start building it because on Moxfield, and I'm assuming Architect as well, there is a copy button.
Yeah, duplicate.
You can just duplicate the deck list into your Moxfield account. Then you can start editing it.
Yeah, a great way to do it.
Yep.
Look, I think the much shorter term way of doing this, admittedly it's not as effective, is you can just go to the EDH rec page for a commander and just scroll through and you will just see the kinds of cards people are playing. Like, if you look at a list and you're like, oh, wow, people would build fun spells in this thing, and then you look at it and it's all counter spells, it's like, it's just another control deck. That's probably not what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
Definitely. And look, the best thing about doing all of this while you're playtesting is we didn't waste our time buying the deck. We didn't sleeve it up. We didn't try it 20 times and go, maybe if I cut this theme and then do this, it'll be worth it. We just retired the deck and it was probably what was supposed to happen, right?
And honestly, I have had so many situations where I've like built a version of a deck that I'm like, I'm never going to build in paper.
Yeah.
And someone comes to me and goes, I'm trying to build this like Spellslinger deck, but I'm not sure. Like, and I'm like, hey, I've got a draft kicking around for a Spellslinger deck. Let me show you that. See if you want to do anything with it.
Definitely. I have an archive folder of my Moxfield where I chucked like unlisted decks. I take them down so they're not like visible as public decks so people don't like click on them and go like...
Because you're embarrassed by them. The shame of the archive folder.
Like, I don't want you to see these. But you can just tuck them away and every now and then a new set or card will come out and I'll go, maybe that deck I brewed might work now. Maybe it's fun now.
That Kithkin Typal deck is now finally viable.
It's valid, finally. But, you can bust it out. You can make some tweaks and then go, nope, it's still not for me.
Kithkin will never be a thing.
Not worth it.
Stop trying to make Kithkin happen.
I'm so sorry. It's not going to happen. Look, for some of us, playtesting may feel like pulling teeth, and that's totally fine. there are a lot of issues you can remedy before a deck's first appearance if you do this one thing right. Increasing consistency, eliminating unnecessary fluff, and focusing on the parts of a deck that bring you joy will mean constructing decks that you'll love to play for months or even years to come.
Damn straight.
So, Space Commanders, command received.
Wow, big one.
Nice.
Lots to talk about in playtesting.
Definitely. So to the listeners, do you feel commanded? And how do you playtest your decks? Is there anything that we do that's different to you? And is there anything you do that you think we should be doing?
Yeah, are there any keyboard shortcuts that we should learn? Because honestly, that's one of my favorite parts about these online playtest spaces. Yeah. Look, you can tell us on the social media platform of your choice, at Get Commanded on all of them. But like we said at the start of this episode, the Twitch channel and the Twitch chat live talking to us in the moment while we're playing Commander is the best place to do it. Twitch.tv/getcommanded. Watch all our content there and on demand at YouTube.
Yeah.
At the YouTube place.
The YouTube place. That's the place that you can go. Don't forget as well to check out, I don't know.
I was like trying to say YouTube channel and then went, the YouTube.
The YouTube place.
The place. The YouTube place.
Where you tube. Anyway, Patreon. It's the absolute best way to support the Get Commanded podcast. And this episode was brought to you from the brain of Wizard Down Under.
Yeah, thanks, Wizard Down Under.
Yeah, you too can request an episode with us if you join in the Space Commander tier. So we'd like to thank our patrons, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, Dyer, and Dylan Norg, and Bertie. And we'd also like to make a very special shout out to those Space Commanders, Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under. You guys are the best.
Yeah, we look forward to your next commissioned episode. Is that what
I don't know.
Demanded episode?
Your commissioned transmission?
Your commanded episode. I like that.
Nice.
Thanks again to Palms Off Gaming for sponsoring this podcast. If you don't know who Palms Off Gaming at this point are, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, loser.
Go to palmsoffgaming.com.au /# Get Commanded and check out all of the amazing deck boxes, sleeves, and binders and other gaming accessories. And when you go to that link, you get a cheeky 10% off your purchase and support us at the same time. So you can go to palmsoffgaming.com.au /# Get Commanded for that 10% code and check out all their amazing stuff.
They've got so much stuff and every day they bring out more of it. It's awesome to see.
Get to go to their warehouse again next week. Very, very keen.
Hype. Yeah.
Get to chat with the boys and see. They apparently just had a delivery of a bunch of new stuff, which is really cool. Very excited to see it before it hits the shelves.
Cheeky samples.
Oh, maybe we can do it. I'm not promising anything, but I'll ask if we can give our listeners something.
Ooh, that would be nice. That would be nice. See how we go there. That's all the magic stuff.
Yeah.
We'd better Planeswar.
Planeswar. We play test out of playtesting and playtest our real lives. Let's practice real life conversation. Should we give it a
Hello, James.
That's basically what this podcast is practicing social interaction.
We don't actually leave the house. We've been practicing. Someday we'll get there.
These secret lab chairs are fused to our backs at this point.
Ugh.
What have you been up to?
I have been watching, I'd seen like a little bit of it over my partner's shoulder. I finally got down to watching the actual first season of this. Heartbreak High? Have you seen this?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Okay, so it's a remake of an old Australian TV show that came out in like the 90s.
Makes sense. I wasn't in Australia in the 90s.
Yeah, there you go. It's a Netflix original, I believe. I'm 90% sure of that. Basically, I would describe it as Australian sex education.
I love Sex Education. Fantastic
Brilliant show.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the equivalent. So it's not explicitly like Sex Education's very like this is the lesson of the episode. You know, we're looking at polyamory in this episode, or we're looking at lesbianism in this episode. It's not quite as explicit as that, but it's basically just like a bunch of Australian high schoolers trying to learn what it is to be a teenager. Being taught by teachers who are sometimes good and mostly terrible.
Yeah, sure.
And, dramatic and traumatic things happen to them.
The typical, like, coming-of-age television show. Sure.
But it's really good. And like Sex Education, there's a bunch of queer characters, there's like a non-binary character, there's people of color, there's an Aboriginal character. Like,
cool.
It's a really good look at sort of what it is to be an Australian
Where is it set
teenager.
In Australia?
It's definitely filmed in Sydney. I think they mentioned Sydney a couple of times.
So it's probably in Sydney.
But it's that kind of like nebulous, like it could be Sydney.
To be honest, if you were raised in Australia and you've like, you had those weekends going to the public park and using the public barbecues, you'll relate to it kind of thing.
Yeah. And look, like, I know we talk a lot in Melbourne about how bad Sydney is and how much we hate it. They're really not that different to people in Melbourne.
We are going up to Sydney in a month to hang out with Sydneyites.
We're schmoozing you now.
Yeah, we love Sydney.
We love
Sydney. It's great.
I know so many people in Sydney.
The tunnel system isn't confusing at all.
I love when there's water in the way of the road. Anyway.
God, Melbourne's such a better city.
Shut up! We're gonna go there. Anyway, no, look, it's just like really good. It's really wholesome and really interesting. There was the 4th episode, I think, or maybe the 6th. There's this particular episode that is explicitly about the Aboriginal character.
Yeah,
and it's so beautifully done, and it's written by I'm blanking on his name. It's something Wyatt, I think, who's this brilliant Aboriginal Australian actor and writer.
Right.
And they specifically, for this show, they have like head writers and stuff. They bring people in to write about the experiences.
Those topics,
so this episode was about Malachi.
So it's not like an Aboriginal experience through the thoughts and eyes of a white man. It's a real representation of that.
Yeah, and there's a character on the show who is autistic, who is played by an autistic person.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
And she had creative input on the episodes that were like the topics that were about her. She was like, oh no, this is kind of more like my experience.
How many seasons has this got?
It's got 2. I just finished the first season, which was outstanding. I've heard the second season's a little rockier, like it's not as universally acclaimed, but it's been renewed for a 3rd season, which will come out soon-ish.
I need a new binge show, so I might get on it.
It's really good. I really highly recommend it. I think it's like a 10 episode, like 40-minute episodes kind of thing.
Sure.
I will say towards the end of season 1, there's kind of like an implied trauma in the early episodes. Like there's a character who is clearly not okay, and it's pretty heavily implied that something awful has happened to them. In the last episode, you actually see what has happened, and it is so much worse than you think it will be. And it's
so fair trigger warning on
it's a big content warning, especially for that last episode, and just like it was pretty out of left field for me. Like it was stomachable for me. Like I'm a bit of a softie when it comes to content. Like really violent and really horrible.
I have never been able to watch gore horror with Walt.
No,
ever.
I just can't do it. And it was like still fine for me. But I will just say like just because of the tone of the rest of the show is kind of like Sex Education. Like it's kind of goofy and funny and like people are kind of like, oh, what the hell's going on? Like the tone's kind of a bit.
It's coming of age. It's that
it's got like
trials and tribulations, but overcome, and at the end of it's all happy.
It's all happy and daisies or whatever. And then this last episode comes around and you're like, whoa. That is so much darker than anything I expected. So anyway, just as a warning, like the first few episodes are very like that Sex Education, everything's going to be okay.
I do love series that do this though. Like for example, Blackadder. There's a Blackadder Goes Forth.
Sure.
Fantastic show, hilarious all the way through, and then right at the end, it's during World War One, and right at the end is like a very horrific moment where a lot of characters die.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and that's it. And it ends. And it just goes silent. And you're like, what the hell? And it's like, it's how, in my opinion, a comedy show can make a valid, really profound point.
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
I think comedies have been doing this for literally thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
that's what like a macabre tragedy comedy is. Like,
black comedy is like a whole genre of thing for a reason. I mean, like literally you can go back to Shakespeare. And you have the extremely tragic Hamlet, for instance. Yeah. And there's the gravedigger scene, which is just filled with 16th century sex jokes.
Yeah. Basically.
Like every second line out of the gravedigger's mouth is like cock. Cock.
Big dick. That's
big dick,
basically
skull,
what
cock,
he's saying.
Big dick.
Yeah. And your dad's dead. I'm sorry about that.
I'm so sorry your dad died, by the way. And that is a reminder. That is him looking at the skull.
To be or saying, not to be.
Oh, not to be or not to be. That comes later. But it's Alas Poor Yorick. I knew him well. Like it's a very deep and meaningful moment.
Holding the skull of his friend is so intense.
In the context of this big comedy. Like it's a thing that happens, and I agree. I think it actually can hammer home a point when something is funny and then goes, but just as a reminder, the stakes are here and they are real.
Yeah. And that's kind of a reflection of life sometimes.
100%. I loved Heartbreak High. Highly recommend it. I think it's on. I'm not going to promise for you American watchers that it's on American Netflix because I know you guys get different stuff.
But we all know what a VPN is, right?
Yes.
We all know what a VPN is, right?
Today we get sponsored by VPN. I'm going to go all in. Until that day.
NordVPN brought to you by...
That's all we have time for until we get a VPN sponsorship. So we'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Command.
Good. Bye, Commander. Player.